Hi guys, welcome to the channel of love. Okay, today, right now, is a good time to do some reading. It's a bit of a dismal day, if we want to say that, outside. I really need to get on with the chapter. I don't know why we've been prolonging it. I have tried on a few occasions to read this. Okay, see, look, even the book's buried. Dust it off. Okay, so we was on chapter 7. What was the chapter called? Cultivate creative vision. And I know that I stopped halfway through the chapter and Napoleon Hill was moving on to discussing something else with Andrew Carnegie. Okay, so chapter 7, cultivate creative vision, study group, how to raise your own salary, Napoleon Hill. Hill, now Mr. Carnegie, let us get away from the field of invention and see how the principle of imagination may be applied in the less complicated fields of endeavour. Carnegie, very well. Take, for example, the first great mail order house that was established in the United States. Here we have a fine example of synthetic imagination applied to merchandising. A telegraph operator with whom I formerly worked found that he had extra time on his hands which he could not use in connection with his duties as a railroad telegrapher. Being a man with an inquisitive type of mind, he began to search for something he could do that would keep him occupied and at the same time add to his income. Here again, the question of motive entered the picture, the motive of financial gain. After having turned the matter over in his mind for several months, he envisioned a portable outlet for his efforts by using the idle telegraph line for the purpose of selling watches to his fellow operators in his division. So he ordered half a dozen watches at wholesale rates and began to offer them for sale. The idea caught fire from the very beginning. In a very short time he had sold all 6 of the watches. Then, spurred on by his success, his imagination began to expand until he took on other items of jewellery. Everything went well, and he was doing a land office business until his superintendent found out what he was up to and fired him on the spot. Every adversity brings with it the seed of an equivalent benefit. Out of this telegrapher's adversity was born the first great mail order house. He switched his method of selling from telegraphy to the malls using, at first, a mimeographed catalogue of his wares. Moreover, he added others outside the field of telegraphers to his list of prospective buyers, mainly people living in the villages and rural districts. In a little while, his business had grown to where he could afford a printed catalogue illustrated with pictures of his merchandise. From that point on, the story is known to millions of people throughout the United States who now purchase merchandise from the mail order house he established. Checking I've got the volume up. He finally took a partner into the business with him, thereby making use of the mastermind principle. This partner proved to be a veritable gold mine because he had a keen sense of advertising. Several years later, the business was sold out to a corporation at a price which made its owners multimillionaires. That was the beginning of mail order merchandising on a large scale. Now, there was nothing very mysterious about this man's success. He simply put his mind to work on a definite purpose and kept behind that purpose until it made him rich. He did not create anything new. He merely put an old idea to a new use. In this manner, many of the great fortunes have been accumulated. Hill, if I understand you correctly, Mr. Carnegie, the telegraph operator applied only the principle of synthetic imagination. Carnegie, yes, that is it. You see, he did nothing except apply the principle of merchandising in a new way. But do not forget that this is about all that most successful men do. Rarely do men create basically new ideas through the application of creative imagination, as Dr. Bell and Mr. Edison did. Now, let us take a look. Doesn't say that. Sorry, I'm distracted by Tia eating. I'm sure she'll be done soon. The little one's come for her dinner, her lunch. Okay, now let us take the modern railroad refrigerator car, for example. The man who first made practical application of this principle revolutionised the meatpacking business. He was a packer whose business was limited due to the fact that he could ship fresh meat only a short distance. Motivated by a desire to extend his business over a greater territory, he began to search for a suitable method. A man generally finds whatever he is looking for if he gives his desire obsessional proportions. Well, this packer was motivated by the desire for larger financial gains, so he kept his mind on his problem until it occurred to him to convert an ordinary railroad box car into an oversized icebox. There was nothing left to do except to go to work and experiment with the idea, which he proceeded to do. The plan worked satisfactorily, although the first refrigerator car was a very crude affair. He kept on improving his idea until he had refined it into the modern refrigerator car as we know it today. His idea not only helped him to extend his meat business almost without limitation, but it gave a new impetus to the sale and distribution of other lines of merchandise, particularly fruits and vegetables. Until today, that single idea has added hundreds of millions of dollars of wealth to individuals, corporations, and the nation as a whole. The refrigerator car was brought into existence solely by the application of synthetic imagination through the simple process of placing an icebox on wheels, so to speak. George Pullman performed a similar feat by placing beds in railroad coaches, thus converting them into sleeping quarters. There was nothing new about either the beds or the railroad coaches, but the idea of combining these two types of service was new. The new combination made the men who created it an immense fortune, to say nothing of providing thousands of jobs for others and a desirable service for the travelling public, for which it continues to pay a huge sum annually. Ideas such as these are the products of imagination. The man who trains his mind to create ideas, or to give to old ideas a new and better use, is well on the road towards economic independence. Back of these ideas was the personal initiative of the men who created them, plus the principle of organised individual endeavour, through which they were made practical. But the sleeping car and the refrigerator car had to be promoted and sold, thus necessitating the investment of large amounts of capital. Both of these ideas, and all similar ideas that are made practical, require the application of some combination of the principles of individual achievement, but in the final analysis, such ideas generally can be traced back to their originating source in the imagination of one person. Hill, will you name the principles which are most commonly used by those who apply the principle of imagination? Carnegie, well, that depends somewhat on the nature of the application that is to be made of imagination and the person making it. But generally speaking, the following are the principles which are more often allied with imagination. A. Definiteness of purpose, based on an obsessional desire growing out of one or more of the 9 basic motives. See list of 9 basic motives in Chapter 2. The motive which more commonly serves to stimulate the imagination is that of a desire for financial gain. The profit motive has been without a doubt the greatest inspiration to the men who have developed industrial America. B. The mastermind principle, through which men go into a huddle and frankly exchange thoughts with the object of solving business or professional problems, is also a great stimulation of the imagination. It was this principle, more than all others, through which the steel industry, of which I was the founder, became prosperous. The so-called Round Table is a great institution. When men sit down and begin to pool their ideas in a spirit of harmony and oneness of purpose, they soon find a solution to most of the problems that confront them, no matter what business they may be engaged in, or what may be the nature of their problems. C. Going the extra mile comes in prominently for its share of credit as a stimulant to the imagination. When a man makes it a habit to do more than he is paid for, he generally begins to draw upon his imagination for new sources through which to render this sort of service. This fact alone would be sufficient compensation for going the extra mile, even if there were not still greater benefits available. D. Applied faith is a definite source of stimulation of the imagination. Moreover, it is an essential in connection with the stimulation and application of creative imagination. Men with little or no faith will never receive the benefits of creative imagination. And E. Organised individual endeavour depends directly upon the application of imagination for its effectiveness, as all forms of definite planning are carried on through imagination. There are many other sources of stimulation of the imagination, but these 5 are on the must list. Fear sometimes stimulates the imagination, while of course at other times it paralyses the imagination. When a man is in great danger, his imagination often performs seemingly superhuman feats, especially where self-preservation is the motive. Failure and temporary defeat sometimes have the effect of stirring one's imagination, although more often they have the opposite effect. The question method, which master salesmen often resort to, has the effect of arousing the imagination and putting it to work, and the reason for this is obvious. By asking questions, the salesman forces his prospective buyer to think. Moreover, he chooses the line of thought to be engaged in by the adroitness of his questions. Curiosity often stimulates imagination to a high pitch. Curiosity growing out of death and the uncertainty of life, and the unknown and perhaps unknowable facts of immortality, has been the chief source of inspiration out of which all the religions have grown. Self-expression, through speaking and writing, is a never-ending source of stimulation of imagination, as are many other forms of action. The very moment a man begins to organise his thoughts for the purpose of expression, whether through words or deeds, he starts his imagination to work. For this reason, children should be encouraged to give free expression to their thoughts, as this develops imagination early in life. Okay, let's just have a drink. Hunger. Try and get these words out. Hunger is a universal source of inspiration of imagination. When a man needs food, his imagination goes to work automatically, without any form of urge. In the lower order of life, instinct goes to work in the face of hunger, and I have known of ingenious applications of instinct under such an urge. Thus we see that whatever we touch life, whether in man or the lower orders of organic life, imagination and instinct may be found as essential parts of the individual's working equipment. Concentration of attention on a definite problem or object tends to put the imagination to work immediately. Witness, for example, the astounding achievements of Dr. Elmer R. Gates, who created hundreds of useful inventions by sitting for ideas. The same principle was used by Thomas A. Edison and Dr. Alexander Graham Bell. By fixing their minds on definite objectives through definiteness of purpose, they put creative imagination to work with far-reaching results. Scientists, and sometimes laymen, put their imaginations to work by setting up hypotheses of facts or ideas which, for the time being, they assume to exist. Scientific research and experiment would hardly be practical if hypothetical cases were not utilised, as often the facts for which they are searching are entirely unknown. Lawyers and trial judges often resort to the use of hypothesis in order to establish facts that cannot be uncovered through any other source. The chemists and the physicists resort to the same method when searching for unknown facts, and so does the doctor when other means of diagnosis of disease fail him. Detectives often work entirely through the aid of hypothesis in the solution of crime. Hill, why is it that so few people appear to have a well-developed imagination? Is the capacity for keen imagination a matter of heredity? Mr. Carnegie, let's get these words out, Lucy. You can do it. I know. Carnegie, no, the faculty of imagination, like all other faculties of the mind, can be developed through use. The reason so many people seem not to have a keen imagination is obvious. Most people allow the faculty of imagination to atrophy through neglect. Is that how I say that? Atrophy. Through neglect. It's like trophy with an A in front. Hill. Inasmuch as everyone must use salesmanship in one way or another, will you illustrate how imagination can be used in selling? Let's move on. Okay. Carnegie. I'm not going to stop this and re-record this. We're nearly there. We are nearly there. Carnegie. I can give you an endless number of examples of this sort. Take the case of a life insurance agent whom I know, for instance. He began selling insurance after an accident which incapacitated him for any sort of heavy manual labour, and within a year he became the high man for the entire United States in the agency force of his company. I will give you one illustration that will tell the story of his success, but before I do so, I think I should tell you that this man became a master at applying the mastermind principle. He also became equally proficient in applying many of the other principles of achievement, among them creative vision. One day, he walked into the office of a very distinguished and wealthy lawyer and came out within half an hour with an application for a $1 million policy on the lawyer's life, although the lawyer was known to have refused to purchase insurance from a half dozen or more of the blessed insurance men in the city in which he lived. And this is the way he did it. He carried with him a fully illustrated newspaper feature story of the lawyer's activities, set in type with a heavy streamer headline which read, "Prominent lawyer insures his brains for $1 million." The story told how the lawyer has come up from the bottom through his unusual skill as a cooperation attorney until he was in a position where he commanded the most select clientele in New York City. The story was well written. It carried pictures of the lawyer and the members of his family, including a picture of his Long Island estate. He handed the story to the lawyer and said, "I have made arrangements for this story to be released in over 100 newspapers the moment you prove that you can pass the necessary physical examination. I hardly need to suggest to a man of your intelligence that the story will bring you enough new clients to more than pay for the premium on the insurance policy." The lawyer sat down and read the story carefully. When he had finished, he asked how the insurance man had procured so much information about him and how he managed to get those pictures of his family. "Oh," replied the insurance man, "that was easy. I simply made arrangements with a newspaper syndicate to do the job." The lawyer read the story a second time, made a few corrections in it, handed it back and said, "Let's have your application blank." The sale was closed. In a few minutes, but more than 3 months of preparation went into it before the insurance agent made his call. He left no detail unattended. He made it his business to find out all about the lawyer before the story was written, and saw to it that the story was so prepared that it got under the lawyer's skin at his weakest point, which was his desire for publicity. What he really sold the lawyer was not an insurance policy on his life, but an insurance policy on his vanity. That streamer headline turned the trick. Moreover, he not only earned a fat premium on the sale, but he received £500 from the newspaper syndicate for the exclusive use of the story. $500, sorry. Now that was imagination, or I miss my guess. Salesmen with imagination often sell something entirely different from that which they appear to be selling. The experience of Dr. Harper, a former president of the University of Chicago, aptly illustrates what I mean. Dr. Harper was one of the greatest endowment getters the educational world has ever known. We're losing the flow, aren't we? Okay. Dr. Harper was one of the greatest endowment getters the educational world has ever known. He took a notion to build a new building on the campus that required $1 million endowment. If you wish to see imagination as it is employed by a master, observe the technique through which he got his $1 million. Observe also how many of the principles of individual achievement he applied in addition to imagination. First of all, he chose his prospective donors with adroitness, confirming the number to 2 well-known Chicago men, each of whom were quite able to donate $1 million. It could not have been purely accidental that these 2 men were known to be bitter enemies. One was a professional politician and the other was the head of the Chicago Street Railway system. For years, these 2 men had been fighting each other, a fact which would have meant nothing to anyone with less imagination than Dr. Harper possessed. One day, precisely at 12 o'clock, Dr. Harper strolled into the office of the streetcar magnate, found no one on duty at the outer door, which was exactly as he expected the situation to be, and walked into the streetcar man's private office unannounced. The magnate looked up from his desk, but before he had time to protest, the super salesman said, "I beg your pardon for walking in unannounced, but I found no one in the outer office. My name is Dr. Harper, and I just called to see you for a minute." "Please be seated," said the streetcar man. "No, thank you," replied the educator. "I have only a minute, so I will tell you what I have in mind and then be on my way. I have been thinking for some time that the University of Chicago should do something to recognise you for the wonderful job you have done in giving the city the finest street railway system in America, and I had in mind honouring you with a building on the campus to be named for you. When I mentioned the matter to our board, one of the members had the same idea, but wanted us to honour, naming the streetcar man's enemy. So I just came in to tell you what had happened with the hope that you might find some way to help me defeat this board member's plan." "Well," exclaimed the streetcar man, "that is an interesting idea. Do please be seated and let us see what we can work out, will you?" "I am very sorry," the educator apologised, "but I have another engagement in a few minutes and I must hurry on to it. But I tell you what I suggest. You think the matter over during the night and telephone me in the morning if any plans come to mind that might help me to get the right man's name on the building. Good day, sir." Without leaving any opening for further conversation, the master of imagination bowed himself out. The next morning, when he arrived at his office at the university, he found the streetcar man awaiting him. The 2 men walked inside, remained there about an hour, after which they walked out again, both of them smiling. Dr. Harper carried a cheque in his hand, waving it back and forth in the air to blot it. The cheque was for $1 million. The streetcar man had found a way to beat his enemy to the draw, as the clever Dr. Harper figured he would do. Moreover, he had sealed the bargain by delivering the money with the understanding that Dr. Harper would become personally responsible for its acceptance. we got there. Okay. Chapter 8 is exercise self-discipline. But let's leave with this little quote here that's on this page. Edison failed 10,000 times before he perfected the incandescent electric lamp. The average man would have quit after his first failure, which explains why there are so many average men and but one Edison. Thanks for sticking with me on that chapter, guys. I will catch up with you soon. Okay, take care. Much love. Bye for now.